His name is Khan, and he has become one of the most famous politicians in the world. Yes, Sadiq Khan first came to global prominence when he was elected Mayor of London in 2016 and became the first Muslim to lead a major Western capital city. His spat with then-President Donald Trump, who among other insults called Khan a stone-cold loser, attracted global headlines and made Khan a target for Islamophobes from around the world. The thing is, the mayor isn't a loser. He's won 2 terms already and is now trying to win a 3rd. On May the 2nd, London goes to the polls, and this time Labour politician Khan is facing off against a MAGA-style Conservative Party opponent called Susan Hall. But the coming crucial election hasn't stopped Khan from taking some pretty strong stances. He was one of the first major politicians in the West to call for a ceasefire in Gaza, just a few weeks after October the 7th. Earlier this month, on a visit to London, I sat down with the mayor to talk elections, Gaza, Islamophobia and more. Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, thank you for joining me on Zeteo.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's good to be back in London always. Good excuse to come see you. We first met, I tried to think this through, when did we first meet? And I think it was about 2009-10. There was an Eid reception at Downing Street. Gordon Brown was Prime Minister. I think it was the first conversation we met. And you were a less grey, but still super confident, super eloquent politician, tooting Member of Parliament at the time. Got to ask, 15 years ago, were you already planning to be a 3-term Mayor of London, or did you have your eyes set on the Prime Ministership?
Listen, no. At that stage, I was really proud to be part of Gordon's team. Gordon was a great Prime Minister. I was serving in his cabinet, and Gordon asked me to organise the iftar you're talking about. The first time ever in Downing Street, there'd been the iftar, and Gordon Brown was really keen as a Prime Minister to make everyone feel part of British society, including Muslims as well. I was looking forward to winning the general election in 2010. Unfortunately, Gordon Brown lost the general election, and my party, the Labour Party, has been out of office for 14 years now. Yeah. But I think I've got the best job in politics as the Mayor of London.
You also get to be in office while the rest of your party are out of office. You're the Mayor of London. You're not the Prime Minister. And yet you have recently called for a UK arms embargo on Israel. Something I support. A lot of people watching this, I assume, would support. But what do you say to your critics who say, you're the Mayor of London? UK arms policy is a matter for the national government. It's nothing to do with you. That's the Prime Minister's job, the Foreign Secretary's job. Why are you getting involved? What is your response to people who say that?
Look, I am the Mayor of London, and what I've tried not to do is to give a running commentary on foreign affairs. That's not my job. My job is to make sure we've got great trains, great housing, great police, great fire service, a thriving, flourishing city. When I'm asked a question, I try and be candid and honest in my answer rather than being evasive. We are a city, I'm really proud to say, that's the most diverse in the world. Yes, more diverse than New York. More than 300 languages spoken here. We've got Londoners who are Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, Sikh, Hindu, Muslim, members of an organised faith and members of none. The conflict in the Middle East is having an impact on my city. Every few Saturdays, there are hundreds of thousands of Londoners and those from across the country of all backgrounds marching in our city against the actions of Israel and the IDF in Gaza. I was asked a question and I gave an answer. And here's why I gave the answer that I did. We're now 6 months on from the atrocities on October the 7th, Park 1948, 1967, the Intifada, on a park all that, because we haven't got time. I've unequivocally condemned the actions of Hamas on October the 7th, and those 130 hostages should be released. I think it's possible to be pro-Palestinian and to criticise unequivocally the actions of Hamas on October the 7th. At the same time, we have a situation where starvation appears to be being used as a weapon of war. You've got a situation where 2.2 million people are on the brink of a famine, and yet it's possible some of our weapons, British weapons, could be being used by Israel and the IDF. It's also a concern to me that the British government, despite weeks of being asked, hasn't released its legal opinion whether or not Israel is in breach of international humanitarian law. And by the way, that was before 6 foreign aid workers got killed. More than 200 aid workers have been killed in Palestine, but because they are Palestinian, nobody talks about it. In a perverse way, the fact that 3 British people, 1 American Canadian, 1 Polish man, 1 Australian and a Palestinian were killed. And we're now talking, governments about things that some of us have been saying for the last 6 months.
When you came out for a ceasefire, the former Jewish Chronicle editor Stephen Pollard said, "Shame on you, Sadiq Khan, you are no friend of the Jews." The chief rabbi said you were being irresponsible. As someone who I know has worked very hard to win over the trust and support of Jewish Londoners, you've been shown zero tolerance, I know you say, for anti-Semitism on the left. How hard was it for you to take a pro-ceasefire position and face all this incoming, all this criticism from prominent Jewish British people?
So the very first event I did when I was elected mayor in 2016, the very first event I did was to attend Yom HaShoah. And for those of you that don't know, this is the personal Jewish grief about the Holocaust. So there's the Holocaust Memorial Days where we commemorate Holocaust across history from Rwanda to Darfur and elsewhere. But Yom HaShoah is a particularly personal grief that the Jewish people have. And that's the very first event I did as mayor in 2016. And since then, I spent a lot of time with Jewish friends, neighbours and colleagues being their mayor, because I'm a mayor for all Londoners, which is really, really important, as well as all the other religions and those who aren't members of organised religion. And so I'm fully cognizant of the strong feelings there are, fully aware of the strong feelings there are on all sides in relation to these sorts of issues. But I've got to say and do what I think is right. I'm actually disappointed by some of the response from Jewish leaders, Jewish friends. And here's an interesting observation that somebody told me about, which I wasn't aware of. Very shortly after I called for a ceasefire, the Mayor of Greater Manchester called for a ceasefire. I've not seen the chief rabbi, the Jewish Chronicle, say comments said against me in relation to my calls for a ceasefire. And I'd ask those Jewish people to just pause and reflect on their response to me calling for a ceasefire. What motivated them to come out in the way they did against the Mayor of London and the Mayor of Greater Manchester? I'll give you a clue. He's not called Ahmed Bourani, he's called Andy Burnham, whereas I'm called Sadiq Khan.
That's what you've had to face up to. I want to come to that in a moment. And of course, they didn't react to David Cameron calling for a ceasefire in that way either. We will come to that. You've also been accused of allowing quote unquote anti-Semitic hate marches in London. Often the evidence that's cited for that is that some of the people in those marches are carrying placards saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Now, most people I know who say that say they want full equality and rights for everyone living in that patch of land. That is what they mean. That's what they tell me. Do you believe that slogan is an anti-Semitic or hate-filled slogan?
Well, let me do with the protest. It's really important I do with the protest because you've got views in America and also the UK, but also across the globe.
Indeed.
And so in the UK, protest, freedom of expression, is a cornerstone of our democracy. Not only is it enshrined in the Human Rights Act, Article 10, right to protest, Article 11, freedom of expression, it's in our common law going back hundreds of years, dare I say more than 1,000 years. So it's really important to understand that's one of our human rights, the right to protest. There are some limitations on the right to protest. The police can ban a march if there's concern about serious public disorder. When Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister, we had protests around the poll tax. Yeah. When Tony Blair was the Prime Minister, we had protests against the Iraq War. I was on many of them. Tuition fees. When David Cameron was Prime Minister, aided by Nick Clegg, massive protests against the trebling of tuition fees. Yeah. Theresa May, Prime Minister, many protests against Brexit. Never before has a Prime Minister or Home Secretary called for protests to be banned until very recently. Look, I'm quite clear. Protests should be lawful, peaceful and safe. These marches aren't hate marches. A very small minority have said things that are, in my view, anti-Semitic, that are breaking the law. The police take action.
So let me jump back
them.
in there. What's the bit that's anti-Semitic and what isn't? That's what I want to get to bottom.
So the police have a really difficult job in assessing in real time what is anti-Semitic and what isn't. They will take action if somebody breaks the law, and sometimes they'll go back and take action if they have evidence that they sometimes take video surveillance to do so. Now, the actual phrase, from the river to the sea, it can be argued, and there's a context involved in when you say it, where you say it. What I would say, in a respectful way to those who protest, is, yes, we can have a conversation about freedom of expression. Yes, we can have a conversation about criminal law. But actually, if you know it's causing offence, distress to your friends, neighbours and colleagues who are Jewish, don't say it. We can get to conversations about freedom of expression and criminal law, but actually, look.
But that's a pragmatic point.
No, but here's the other thing.
That's a pragmatic point. I'm not disputing the pragmatic point. Inherently, though, there are people who say inherently, intrinsically, it's an anti-Semitic phrase. You don't believe that.
Here's the problem with the conversation we're having. Every moment we're being diverted about,
Agreed.
is that allowed? We're not talking about what's happening in Gaza.
Agreed.
We're not talking about the 30,000 people who lost their lives.
But
40%
you're also allowing certain Palestinians and supporters of Palestinians to be smeared as anti-Semites for saying a slogan that they believe is a
And the
democratic
police are
slogan.
quite clear. So the police, just to reassure
No,
them.
I'm not asking about the police. I'm asking
No,
about you.
We're talking about criminal law. So
I'm not asking about criminal action. I'm asking your opinion
Well,
on whether you think it's an anti-Semitic
it's all about
statement.
it's all about the context. I think if you go outside a synagogue
Yes, of
and
course.
say those sorts of words, it is anti-Semitic.
But doing it in a pro-Palestine march saying, I support freedom for Palestinians, it's not.
No, it's about context. And the police have been quite clear, and I agree with the police, it's about context.
What's interesting is that the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, as you say, and Suella Braverman, the then Home Secretary, came out and made these outrageous attacks on the idea of free protest.
Oh, it's worse than that. The Home Secretary summoned the Commissioner in and basically told him he's got to ban them. They in a public forum, blamed me and said that I should have banned
Because
the
your
marches.
name isn't Andy Burnham, as we discussed. There is a Muslim context to this. The Muslim Mayor of London, Muslims protesting for Palestine, Suella Braverman talking about Islamists running Britain, comments about you that we'll come to. The Islamophobia in the Tory party right now is off the charts. Lee Anderson, the former deputy chair, said Islamists control you, that you've handed over the city to your Islamist mates. The Prime Minister refused to call that racist or Islamophobic. How normalised, how amplified is Islamophobia in the Tory party on the right today? And has it gotten worse since October the 7th?
Yeah, I think now Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hatred, and that sort of racism is now being normalised, and it's in the mainstream of most of the Western world, not just this country. And what upsets me is I think there are some things that are actually cross-party and not about party politics.
Yeah.
So in real time, it's a matter of record, in real time, I was calling out Labour politicians and practicing the Labour Party that were anti-Semitic, all right? In real time, it was difficult to do so because these are my colleagues, I was calling them out. I would have hoped in the Conservative Party, there'd be Conservative politicians who'd be calling out what is clearly Islamophobic, anti-Muslim hatred. And again, the reason why I use both those phrases is because otherwise, they tend to be Islamophobes will spend 90% of the time talking about definitions of Islamophobia. So I use both to avoid that conversation.
Avoid that, agreed.
Islamophobic, anti-Muslim, and racist. Who called it out? To this day, X months on, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, hasn't said what Lee Anderson said about me was Islamophobic, anti-Muslim, or racist. And that gives permission for others. Of
course it does.
And so, another relevant example is in the first year, Donald Trump was elected president, beg pardon. So the first year Trump's elected president, you know the language he used. Before then, I'd already been receiving lots of racism. The amount of racist hatred against me increased by 2,000%.
Yeah.
Why? Because you've got the leader of the free world normalising things. And the same applies when people like Anderson aren't called to account.
And your opponent, Susan Hall, is a great admirer of Donald Trump. She's liked some pretty Islamophobic tweets about you in the past. When asked about her Islamophobic rhetoric recently, she referred to it as hurty words. If someone at the height of the row of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party had referred to it as hurty words, if you had said what was going on or what the Labour was accused of, what do you think the media would have done?
Let's go
Is
back.
there a double standard?
Let's go back 3 minutes. Imagine saying from the river to the sea, outside a synagogue, it's hurty words. Can you just imagine what would happen? Imagine if somebody used the N-word and somebody said, well, that's just hurty words. Or imagine if somebody used really horrible sexist language about a woman and somebody said, well, that's just hurty words. And there is now...
So there is a British media double standard on this.
And it's seeped into the mainstream.
Yeah.
We're not talking about a peripheral candidate. We're talking about somebody who could well be the next Mayor of London. The Conservatives have either come first or second in the last 24 years. It's a close election race. So somebody who could be the mayor of the most diverse city in the world is basically somebody who doesn't understand either racism.
And my question is, she's getting a pass from the media because I'm saying if she had said this stuff about another community, as you say, black people, Jewish people, she wouldn't have got the same pass from our media.
Well, history tells us no. Not only from the media, but from her own party. So the Labour Party has disciplined lots of people for saying things that are racist. The Conservative Party hasn't. And the media calls out the Labour Party, doesn't call out the Conservative Party, but also when it comes to Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hatred, it appears to be acceptable.
So on that note, you mentioned two names we've mentioned are the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman. Both of them are brown politicians. They are of Asian background, and they are fanning the flames of anti-Muslim hatred. How much does that
shock you? How much does that depress you? It's not coming from white folks, it's coming from our fellow brown folks.
Ignorance, prejudice, racism isn't the preserve of white people, right? We know this from our own backgrounds and stuff, but it hurts me. Why do I say that? It hurts me because I think it's not possible when you properly reflect as somebody who's a person of colour not to have experienced racism. It could be overt, it could be covert, and you've actually walked in those shoes. All of us have. You may not realise it, but when you're lying in your bed and think about it, we've experienced racism. And when somebody's in a position of power and influence, and you've experienced racism, it could be sexism, it could be other forms of hatred. I think it's important that you understand the responsibility you have to use the power you have for good, right? And I just think Sunak and Braverman are either wearing blinkers, they're either receiving bad advice, they're worried about the impact it will cause to their preservation if you're Sunak, or your leadership ambitions if you're Braverman. And the problem is it gives a pass to people who are white to use similar language, because they've said this, well, Swallow Braverman thinks it's okay, so why are you complaining?
Yeah.
Or Richie Sunak thinks it's okay.
And in the US, it's Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy and the same.
It's the same sort of line where, oh, I can't be racist because I know a brown person.
Yes.
It's the same sort of stuff.
So you mentioned the 2,000% increase in hate you got after Trump came after you. One study found that you've received more than 300,000 pieces of racist abuse online since you were elected mayor, not just from Brits, like the businessman Charlie Mullins, who was suspended from Twitter after saying someone should kill you, but especially from Donald Trump supporters in the US. I believe a lot from Narendra Modi supporters in India. What is that like for you on a daily basis? What is that like for your wife, for your daughters, for you to be this target of global Islamophobic hate?
Look, one of the things I remember from school is never showing a bully that you're cowed or upset or scared. You can't do that because it gives them confidence to bully you more. So, I may have grown a thick skin, but I'm pleased you mentioned my wife, my daughters, my mum, my siblings, my nephews and nieces, my friends, my staff who work with me, and I'd like to think, love me and are affectionate towards me. It's deeply distressing to them. It's deeply distressing. But put aside the distress, it's a matter of fact that the terrorist who drove his car into the congregation praying outside Finsbury Park Mosque in 2017 mentioned me because he was looking for me on that day. He was targeting me. He's never met me before. The Christchurch shooter that killed those dozens of innocent people worshipping mosques in New Zealand, he mentioned me. Now, I'm not being funny. Unless they read the London Evening Standard, how do they know about me? What is their Why does somebody in New Zealand got a grievance against me?
And not against Andy Burnham.
And somebody who lives in Wales drives all the way to London against me or Donald Trump. And by the way, I think the way you're asking these questions is ways I'm not usually asked, because you're calling a spade a spade. You're actually being explicit in what's been going on, and I was willing to talk about, which is clearly it's because of the religion I practice, maybe because of the country of my origin, maybe because of the continent of my heritage. It ain't because of my politics, because there are other mayors with my politics.
Yeah, I don't think they drove the car into the mosque because of your housing policies. Something else that I want to ask you about, which is linked to where I come from, and my background is similar to yours, as you know, which is I know for a fact that you have a lot of security now and you get a lot of death threats. I also know that you're a practicing Muslim. You fast, you pray, you believe, and yet you don't just get death threats from the far right for being a Muslim. You get death threats from quote-unquote Islamist extremists who don't think you're Muslim enough.
Well, the first one began in 2013 when I voted for same-sex marriage. And for those of your viewers who aren't Muslim, there's this thing called fatwas, which is like a decree. And an imam, a religious priest from Bradford in a mosque, put out a fatwa against me in 2013. And since then, see, there is this weird thing about the more extreme right you go, you become all the way around here. And so actually, there's commonality between those like Trump and others who believe you can't be a Westerner and Muslim, and those, inverted commas, Islamist preachers of hate who also believe you can't be Western and a Muslim. Integration is a sin on both sides.
Yeah.
And is one of life's ironies.
And you are stuck right in the middle of that Venn diagram. Yeah. We talk about Trump tangentially, let's talk about him directly. He could be president again in 9 months' time. He came after you repeatedly during his first presidential campaign and his first term in office. I say first term because the polls suggest he may have a second term. He called you a stone cold loser, very dumb, weak on terrorism. You said he's unfit to be president and that he pushed anti-Muslim bigotry. How concerned are you by the prospect of another Trump presidency for the world, for America, for Muslims, for yourself?
Look, I'm very conscious that your American viewers seeing this and watching this and reading this will find it incredibly arrogant, patronising for a Londoner, a Brit, to give Americans advice how to vote. And so I'm going to be very careful what I say because I don't want to offend Americans. But I need to explain to your American viewers how respected America is. You aren't just, the one, superpower we look up to, but you are the leader of the free world. Just like you can send out ripples of hope and optimism, you can also send out ripples of fear and dread. And it breaks my heart as somebody who loves America, loves Americans, I've got friends and family who are Americans, loves American culture and American politics, to think about how the reputation of this great country was diminished during those 4 years of the Trump presidency. Put aside for a second the fear I had for my well-being. I've got armed officers looking after me. The concern I had about Muslims across the globe with the Muslim ban and some of the language Donald Trump used. But actually on a whole host of issues that I care passionately about, on climate change and the rights of women, on the rights of minorities, on defeating white supremacy, all these sorts of issues, the separation of powers, it has an impact because if the President of America behaves that way, it sends a message to the President of Poland, the President of Brazil, to the Prime Minister of the UK, to the opposition leader in France and so forth. So it really, really does matter. And just think about the challenges we face across the globe, whether it's Russia, whether it's Netanyahu's Israel, whether it's concerns founded or well-founded or not about China. We need America to be on the pitch. They've got to be on the pitch. And this sort of protectionism, this sort of, it's all about us, we don't care about anybody else, is dangerous for not just Americans, but all of us. So we're willing the Americans to make the right decision in November. It really matters.
And if they make the wrong one and Donald Trump becomes president again, I've got to ask, would he be welcome here in London for another state visit if he's re-elected? There was a big controversy last time round with you not welcoming him to London.
Yeah, look, here's the thing. Look, America and the USA have a special relationship. Of course, whoever the president is, we've got to have good relations with the president of the USA. But I think a special relationship is akin to having a best mate. So the way you treat your best mate is very different to how you treat an acquaintance, a colleague or so forth. You have higher standards of your best mate. We should have higher standards of our best friend at USA. So we should call them out, not roll out the red carpet. We should be saying, listen, we love your country. We love the office of president. What you're saying is wrong. And if you as a good friend can't call out,
So you wouldn't roll out the red carpet for President Trump to London?
No, I wouldn't. But I would do. I would do this. And it's an open invitation. I would take the president to some of our mosques so he could meet Westerners who are Muslims.
That I would love to see. You've got to invite me along for that one.
No, because I think the word prejudice comes from two words, prejudging. And he's prejudged Muslims because he needs to understand Americans, fight for the USA. If they've given their lives for the USA, they give a huge amount of wealth and prosperity to business people in the media and so forth, and indeed journalists. Just
on Trump, one last thing. You were asked constantly, as was many politicians during his presidency, is he a racist, right? There was a big debate, in my view, undeniably. We've now moved beyond that debate. In the United States right now, the debate is he a fascist? Are we getting fascism? This is a guy who says he wants to suspend the Constitution, be a dictator, etc. You talked about that global picture. You mentioned indirectly Marine Le Pen and others, fascists, neo-fascists around the world. Does America go full fascist if Trump comes back to office?
Well, there's reason for hope. There's a number of reasons for hope. Actually, the American system worked pretty well in voting him out. There are very few first-time presidents, as you know, so that seemed to work. In the end, the Capitol Hill, whatever you want to call it, a riot, uprising, whatever. Insurrection was not successful. There was a different discussion about what would happen if he won term two, because he has said he's coming back to finish the job, right?
And vengeance.
Some of the language he's used is a source of concern. Now, up until now, actually, again, the rest of the world has looked with envy at the written constitution the USA have, the separation of powers.
And peaceful transition of power.
And all that. And so, if you're in Pakistan, which has had big issues, or Bangladesh, which has had big issues, you're watching with interest what happens in the USA.
I mean, if you're a fascist abroad, you're certainly watching with interest. Last question. Where do you think politics is more insane right now? In Britain, where you had, 3 Tory prime ministers here in the last 18 months, one of whom didn't last as long as a lettuce, or the US where Donald Trump is running again and might win?
That's probably the toughest question you've asked.
Save the best till last.
Well, here's the thing, you see. There's this great saying which somebody once told me, if London is 10 years ahead of the rest of the country, us as a country are 10 years behind America. So we've actually caught up with you, your term one Trump presidency in relation to the madness of what happened there. I think actually, look, I think half the world's population is going to vote this year, one way or another, in elections. I think it really is an important year for us. I'm embarrassed about some of the things that happened in my country over the last 3 or 4 years. And I know dear friends of mine who are Americans are embarrassed about some of the things that happened in America. But here's the reason for hope and optimism. In the end, the Americans got rid of Donald Trump through the ballot box. And in the end, we got rid of Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, Theresa May, and I'm hopeful Rishi Sunak as well.
Let's see what happens. Mayor Sadiq Khan, thank you for joining us today.
Always a pleasure. Take care.
Thank you so much.